keep reading, because the moment I opened that envelope, everything I thought I knew about my family collapsed. My grandmother died on a Wednesday in March. She was 81 years old, and she died the way she had lived, quietly, without making a fuss. The hospice nurse called me at 6:47 in the morning. I was already awake. I don't know why. I just was. The funeral was small. My grandmother had outlived most of her friends, and the ones still alive were too frail to travel. My mother flew in from Phoenix. My uncle drove up from Savannah. A few neighbors, the pastor from the church my grandmother had attended for 40 years. That was it. I am my grandmother's only grandchild on her side. Her daughter, my mother, had me young, moved away younger, and built a life in Arizona that had very little room in it for things like Sunday phone calls or holiday visits. I was the one who came back. I was the one who spent summers at her house in Macon, Georgia, learning how to make biscuits from scratch and how to play gin rummy and how to sit with another person in comfortable silence without feeling like you had to fill it. My grandmother's name was Ruth, and she was the most quietly intelligent person I have ever known in my life. She died, and I flew to Georgia, and my mother was already there when I arrived. She had let herself in with the spare key and was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad full of notes. Not notes about the service, notes about the house. I should have paid attention to that. I didn't. We buried my grandmother on a Saturday. I cried through the whole service. My mother did not cry at all. She squeezed my hand once during the benediction, and I told myself that people grieve differently. I told myself that. After the reception, after the neighbors went home and the pastor shook our hands and left, my mother said she needed to start sorting through Gran's things. No sense letting it sit, she said. My uncle had already driven back to Savannah. It was just the two of us. I went through Gran's bedroom, her jewelry box, her sweaters folded in the drawer, the stack of paperback novels on her nightstand with the spines cracked from reading them multiple times. I was taking my time, saying goodbye to each thing. My mother was in the living room in the roll-top desk. I didn't think anything of it. The desk was where Gran kept her papers, utility bills, insurance documents, the binder with her medical records. Of course, someone needed to go through it. Of course, my mother would do that. At some point, I came out to ask if she wanted tea, and she was standing very still over the desk, holding a plain white envelope. When she heard me, she closed the roll top with a sharp click. Just bills, she said without turning around. I'll deal with it. I made the tea. I brought her a cup. She set it down without looking at me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in Gran's guest room in the twin bed with the yellow quilt, and I kept thinking about the way my mother had closed that desk. Not like someone putting something away, like someone hiding something. I told myself I was being paranoid. My grandmother had just died. I was exhausted and sad and looking for things to be upset about. That's what grief does. I told myself that, and eventually I slept. My mother flew back to Phoenix the next morning. She said she had to get back to work. She said the estate attorney would handle everything. She said I didn't need to worry about any of it. Gran wanted you to have her china, she said at the door. I'll make sure you get it. She hugged me and left. I spent 3 more days in Macon, finishing the sorting, donating clothes, making arrangements with the estate attorney's office. His name was Mr. Hargrove, and he was a patient man with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a very organized filing system. On my last afternoon there, I went back to the roll-top desk to make sure I hadn't missed anything. The bills, the binder, a address book from the early 2000s, a tin of rubber bands. I opened each drawer carefully. In the back of the bottom drawer, taped to the underside of the wood so that it wouldn't slide or shift, was an envelope. Not a plain white envelope, a cream-colored one, the kind you buy at a stationery store, the kind that feels like it means something. My name was on the front, not my full name, just what my grandmother called me. Maisie, only you. My hands were shaking by the time I got it open. Inside was a letter, handwritten in my grandmother's careful Palmer method cursive. 2 pages. I read them standing at the desk because my legs stopped working and I couldn't make it to a chair. I'm not going to tell you everything the letter said. Some of it is too personal, some of it is still too raw. But here is what I will tell you. My grandmother had a savings account that my mother did not know about. Or rather, my mother had known about it, had found out about it 3 years earlier, and had spent those 3 years trying to access it. She had called the bank twice, pretending to be managing my grandmother's affairs. She had forged a signature on a form requesting a beneficiary change. She had told my grandmother that the account was worthless, outdated, that the bank had probably absorbed it, that it needed to be dealt with before Gran got any older. My grandmother had not believed her. My grandmother had documented everything. In the envelope, along with the letter, was a folded sheet of paper with an account number, a routing number, and the name of the bank, a regional one here in Georgia, not the national bank my grandmother used for her regular checking. There was also a small stack of papers, folded together, printed emails between my mother and the bank, a photocopy of the forged signature form with my grandmother's own note paper clipped to it. This is not my signature. I never signed this, and the handwritten log with dates and times and brief descriptions. Vivian called the bank again. I asked Mr. H to note this. Mr. Hag was Mr. Hargrove, the estate attorney. He had known. My grandmother had told him. She had been building a paper trail for 2 years, quietly, methodically, the way she did everything. I sat down on the floor of the living room and I read the whole letter twice. The last paragraph said, "Go to the bank first. Take everything in this envelope. Ask for the branch manager by name. Her name is written on the back of the account sheet. Then call Mr. Hargrove. He is expecting your call. I am so sorry that I am leaving you this instead of just leaving you peace. But I wanted you to have what is yours. I love you, Maisie. I always have." I did not call my mother. I thought about it for 1 second and then I didn't. I called Mr. Hargrove. His voice, when he heard mine, went very calm and very careful. "She left you the envelope," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," I said. "Okay," he said. "Here's what we're going to do." The branch manager's name was written on the back of the account sheet in my grandmother's handwriting, Denise Crawford. She knows. I drove to the bank the next morning. I asked for Denise Crawford. The teller looked at me for a second and then picked up the phone. Denise Crawford was in her late 50s, a composed woman in a gray blazer who came out from behind a door I hadn't even noticed and shook my hand and said, "Why don't you come back to my office?" She had a box of tissues on her desk. I noticed that right away. I gave her the envelope. She looked through every document carefully, taking her time. When she got to the account number, she typed something into her computer. She looked at the screen for a long moment without speaking. Then she picked up her phone and dialed an internal extension. "Can you come to my office, please?" she said, "and call the fraud line." "Yes, now." She hung up and looked at me. Her face was very steady. "Miss," she said, "your grandmother called me 2 years ago. She came in person after that twice. She was very concerned and very clear about what she suspected was happening." She paused. "The account is intact. It has never been successfully accessed by anyone other than your grandmother." Another pause. "But there were attempts. We have records of all of them." The account had $214,000 in it. I did not know my grandmother had $214,000. I did not know she had ever had that kind of money. Later, I would learn it was decades of careful saving, the sale of a piece of land she'd inherited from her own mother, CDs that had quietly compounded, a life insurance payout from my grandfather that she had never touched. She had lived on her social security and her pension. And she had let that money sit and grow, and she had never told anyone because she said in the letter that the moment you told people about money was the moment they started making decisions about it that weren't theirs to make. She wasn't wrong. What happened next did not happen quickly. I want to be honest about that because the version of this story where everything resolves in a week is not real, and I think you deserve the real version. It took 4 months. There were investigators, the bank's fraud department, and eventually the county DA's office. Mr. Hargrove was involved every step of the way. I had to give a formal statement. I had to provide the documents from the envelope. I had to go through the log my grandmother had kept, line by line, with a detective who took notes on a yellow legal pad and asked the same questions several different ways, which I understood was his job even when it was exhausting. My mother called me twice during those 4 months. The first time she wanted to know when the estate was going to be settled. I told her Mr. Hargrove was handling it and said goodbye. The second time she said she'd heard from someone, I don't know who, that there was some kind of investigation and wanted to know what was going on. I told her she should contact Mr. Hargrove. She told me I was being dramatic. She told me I'd always been too sensitive. She told me that Gran had been confused at the end, and whatever she told me needed to be taken with a grain of salt. I said, Gran was sharp as a tack until the last week of her life, and you know it. Then I hung up. The forgery charge came first. My mother had signed my grandmother's name on a beneficiary change form at the bank. That was documented. The bank had the original, and they had the letter my grandmother had paper clipped to her own copy. Then came wire fraud because one of the attempts to access the account had involved routing a small test transfer. And then elder financial exploitation, which under Georgia law carries serious penalties when the victim is over 65. My uncle called me from Savannah when he found out. He wasn't angry at me, he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, She always worried about Vivian, even when you were little. She never said it out loud, but I could tell. I didn't know what to say to that. I said, I know. He said, You did right, Maisie. My mother was convicted on 2 of the 3 charges. The elder exploitation charge was reduced in a plea agreement, something Mr. Hargrove warned me might happen, and I didn't have the energy to fight. She received a 2-year sentence and 3 years of supervised probation, along with a fine and mandatory restitution. She will not serve the full 2 years. That is something I've had to make my peace with, and I won't pretend it was easy. The $214,000 passed to me as the named beneficiary in the account documents my grandmother had filed with the bank, documents my mother had never been able to change. Mr. Hargrove handled the rest of the estate. The house sold in the fall. I kept the china. I kept the yellow quilt. I kept the letter. People ask me sometimes, mostly online in the comments, which I read even when I probably shouldn't, whether I've spoken to my mother since the sentencing. The answer is no. I thought about it. I thought about it a lot, actually. I thought about the woman who took me to get my ears pierced when I was 9 and braided my hair before school pictures and drove me to the airport the first time I flew alone. I thought about all of that, and I also thought about my grandmother, 80 years old, calling the bank by herself and driving herself there and sitting across from a branch manager and saying, I think my daughter is trying to steal from me. How much courage that had to take. How much it must have hurt. My grandmother chose me. She planned for me. She stayed quiet for years so that the plan would work, so that everything would be in place, so that when it was time, I would have what she wanted me to have. She trusted me to follow through. I wasn't going to let her down. I live in Raleigh now. I have a small apartment with good light and a fig tree on the balcony that I'm slowly figuring out how to keep alive. I work in healthcare administration, which sounds boring and is sometimes boring, but I'm good at it and it pays the bills, and I leave work at work, which matters more to me now than it used to. Some of my grandmother's money is in a high yield savings account. Some of it went toward paying off my student loans, which is a thing my grandmother would have insisted on if she'd known about them. Every month, I transfer a small amount into a separate account that I don't touch. I don't know exactly what it's for yet, something that matters, something she would have approved of. I have her recipe for biscuits taped to the inside of my kitchen cabinet door, written in her handwriting on a note card. When I have a bad week, I make them. They never come out quite as good as hers did, but they're close enough that I can almost hear her telling me to add a little more buttermilk. She was the most quietly intelligent person I have ever known, and she made sure, even from the end, that she was still looking out for me. I keep coming back to one image, my grandmother, 80 years old, driving herself to that bank branch, sitting down across from a stranger, and saying out loud what must have been one of the hardest sentences of her life. I think my daughter is trying to steal from me. She didn't call me first. She didn't fall apart. She did what needed to be done and then she went home and she kept going. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from nowhere. It's built slowly over a lifetime of choosing the harder right thing instead of the easier wrong one. Gran was not a perfect person, she never claimed to be, but she had a moral compass that didn't waver when it was inconvenient. She saw what my mother was doing, named it clearly in her own mind, and refused to pretend otherwise, even when pretending would have been so much simpler. That's what integrity actually looks like. Not grand gestures, just not lying to yourself about what's in front of you. And she was smart about it. That's the part I still think about most. She didn't confront my mother directly, didn't make accusations that could be denied, didn't hand me a problem without also handing me the tools to solve it. She built a paper trail over 2 years. She looped in Mr. Hargrove. She filed the right documents with the bank. She wrote me a letter that told me exactly what to do and in what order. She understood that good intentions without a plan are just feelings, and feelings don't hold up in court. The intelligence she applied to protecting me was the same intelligence she'd applied to everything her whole life. Quiet, methodical, always thinking 3 steps ahead. What I had to bring was the follow through. That part was on me. There were mornings during those 4 months when I genuinely didn't want to get out of bed. When my mother called and told me I was being dramatic, there was a part of me, smaller than I'd like to admit but real, that wanted to believe her, because believing her would have meant I could stop. It would have meant I could let it go and just grieve and not have to be the person sitting across from a detective answering the same questions for the third time. Letting go would have been easier. But easy and right are not the same thing. And I knew that even when I was exhausted. I kept going because Gran had kept going. That felt like the least I could do. What happened to my mother was not luck, and it was not fate. It was consequence. She made choices carefully and repeatedly, and those choices produced an outcome. The account Gran protected is now mine because Gran did the work to protect it. The investigation happened because Gran documented what needed to be documented. None of it fell from the sky. It was built, piece by piece, by a woman who decided that the truth was worth the effort of preserving it. I think about that whenever I feel like something is too hard or too slow or not worth the trouble. Gran didn't get to see it resolved. She died before any of it came to light. She did all of that work without knowing for certain that it would matter. She did it because it was right, because she was thorough, because she loved me enough to try. That's the only inheritance that can't be stolen.